Hi everyone, I'm Jane at Rockin' Worms, and this is Worm Terms, Chapter 2, Migration. So you've all heard about migration, how to move your worms from one place to another. But did you know that there's three main different types of migration, and there's different situations where each type of migration works best. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. And instead of it just being a talking head this time, I'm also going to give you a little show and tell. All right, so the first migration I'm going to share with you is downward migration. It's probably the migration method that you're least familiar with, but it can come in very handy when you have particularly wet or chunky bedding that you want to get your worms off of. So let me show you what a couple typical setups look like for a downward migration so you can start to see how it works and what you may have lying around your house that you can use to do a downward migration. This is a scrap piece of 1/4-inch hardware cloth that I had left over from doing some chicken work. And this is one of my standard worm bins. And all you do in this case is put your hardware cloth suspended over your bin, and then you would take your bedding and place it in the center. But I'm not going to do it on this one. I just want to let you know that this is a potential setup. This is what I'm going to do the demonstration on, just because I think you can see more clearly what is going on. This is a mortar mix, cement mix tray, and this again is another piece of scrap hardware cloth I have lying around the house. So what I'm going to do is put my glasses on, and then I'm going to move over to my bin of volunteer worms. Let's give them a hand. They volunteered to participate in this demonstration of downward migration. This is a grow out bin I have, and I am getting ready to move these guys out of this bedding. You can see how it's mostly castings, right? So I'm getting ready to move these worms out of this bin and into fresh bedding. But I have all ages and stages. So sifting isn't really helpful. So what I want to do is use the worm's own natural aversion to light to get them to do the hard work for me. So all I'm doing is putting the worms, you know what, I forgot one thing. I do like to put a little bedding on the bottom under the screen to give the worms a soft landing. Okay, so all I'm gonna do is spread them out gently into a thin layer, using as much of this screen as I can. Again, this is just for demonstration purposes, so I'm just going to use this section here. Then I'm going to put a strong light on top of them. This is a desk lamp that probably isn't going to sit here because I wasn't planning on doing it this way, but we're going to do it anyways. There we go. All right, so what's going to happen is the worms are going to go, I don't like the light, and they're going to go down through the holes into the bedding below, leaving the old bedding behind. And that is downward migration. The worms do the hard work for you. Now, the upside of downward migration is that you can go through a bin relatively quickly, as in within a couple of hours, to get all your worms to migrate down through the screen into the bedding below. The downside of doing this is you have to come back and kind of keep reloading your worms in your bedding on the top of the screen. And you need to give the worms anywhere from 10, 15 minutes, half an hour sometimes for all the worms to get the memo to move out of the light and into the catch basin below. So how I have done this in the past is I start off just like this. I go away for 15, 20 minutes, and I come back and I'll find that a lot of the worms have gone down below. And what I'll do is I'll scrape off the areas of bedding where the worms have vacated and reload it with another handful of bedding. And I just keep doing that over and over until I've gone through all my bedding and the worms have gone down below. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you is horizontal migration. Horizontal migration you're probably more familiar with, and that's where you have a bin that again is full of worms. My volunteers again are in here, and you want them to move out of one end of the bin into another end of the bin so you can harvest the castings that they've left behind, or alternatively, you can harvest the worms and move them to a new location. Okay, so it isn't necessarily all about harvesting castings. It can be about harvesting the worms themselves. So how you do this, pretend this is your bin, and you're just going to move everybody down to one end. And on the other end, you're going to put attractive food and bedding, fresh stuff that they're going to be eager to get into. So in this case, this is my pre-composted bedding. And as an example, I'm going to seed it with some frozen carrots. Now, melon, apples, bananas, those are all things that worms really like, and they'll be attracted from one end of the bin to the new end of the bin. And what I would do is just put another layer of new bedding on top and let the worms do what worms do. They're going to move from one end where there's less food and less comfortable situation to this end. Now, if I wanted to speed things up, I could cover this end so it remains more moist and leave this end open so it starts to dry down, because the relative less moisture on this end and the relatively high moisture on this end will just be another encouragement for the worms to move where I want them to be. All right, and that is horizontal migration. It works great in any bin, period. It works great in any bin, but particularly if you have a bin where you have a little bit of room so you can separate the two spaces. All right. It doesn't work really well in a 5-gallon bucket. Let me put it that way, because you just don't have enough surface space to work with. All right. The last type of migration is vertical migration. And this type of migration is used primarily in your tray systems or your DIY stacked bin systems. And what that means, the vertical migration, is the worms are in the lower level of the trays or the lower part of the bin, and you make a upper section of the bin or the tray, again, more attractive, so the worms will come up from the bottom into the upper layer where you can then remove them. So how you do that is essentially the same thing you do in the horizontal. You put in bedding. Oops. Everything's falling apart. I'm going to move this light back up here for a minute. That's fine. You put in bedding and some yummy food, and you cover it up. Again, I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. And your worms will come up from the bottom into the top section, where then you can harvest the worms or remove the tray and harvest your castings. All right. Now, where vertical migration works best, again, is in those tray systems, but it's also what is used in continuous flow through bins, CFTs. If you're not familiar with what a CFT is, check out Worm Terms Chapter 1, where I do explain what a CFT is. But a CFT will have the worms and the bedding on the bottom. They keep adding layers towards the top of that big bin. The worms move up, leaving the castings behind on the bottom, where then they are harvested. But again, the whole point is the worms are moving up. Okay, so that is the essence of vertical migration. So the last thing I want to do is just swing back so you can see how the downward migration worked. Now you will recall I had a whole bunch of worms on here, but they're already starting to move through. Now it's only been a couple minutes, so I don't expect a lot of worms to have found their way through, but let's see if any have. Okay, so here's some worms that are, making their way down. Just a few, because again, it's only been a few minutes, but here's some of them. The point is you get the concept. Now, the last thing I wanted to say to you is, hey, what if you're a small operator, you're, have one bin, you're working in your apartment or whatever, and you don't have a mortar tray or pieces of hardware cloth lying around. Well, I've got a solution for you too. You can use something as simple as kitchen items. This is a 9x13 cake pan, and this is a cooling rack. And I'm just gonna put it here. You know what, I'll put it here, maybe the cameraman can see it better. Now these holes are a little big, I grant you that. But again, this is to give you the concept of it. You can put your bedding on top and spread it out. And your worms, again, with a strong light on top of them, will go down through the screening and into your catch basin below. What the point of this is not to use a cooling rack because the holes are too big, but it's to jumpstart the thought in your head that you may have other things lying around your house or at a dollar store or a big box store that has smaller holes, is really inexpensive, and you can use that for downward migration purposes, as opposed to, having to use big mortar trays or buy expensive hardware cloth. All right, so that's it. That's what the 3 types of migration are: downward, vertical, and horizontal. There's different situations where they work better, and you can give them a try now and see what works best for you. All right, so thanks for joining me tonight. I am, as always, yours in the dirt, Jayne.